Picture this: a moonlit grove where shadowy figures chant in a language lost to time, performing rituals so strange they defy modern understanding. These were the Celtic clans, guardians of secrets so profound they've left historians scratching their heads for centuries. From eerie bonfires that whispered to the dead, to curses carved into stone that could doom entire bloodlines, their traditions blur the line between history and myth. What if I told you some of these practices still linger in the quiet corners of Ireland and Scotland, hidden in plain sight? Tonight, we're pulling back the veil on 35 of the most baffling Celtic traditions, customs so mysterious they feel ripped from a fantasy novel. Why did clans bury their dead with coins over their eyes? What dark pact did sin-eaters make with the afterlife? And just how far would you go to escape a fairy's curse? Stoke your curiosity, because the answers are stranger than you dare imagine. This isn't just history, it's a doorway to a world where every tree, stone, and whisper holds a secret. Ready to step through? Let's begin. Now, let's step into the flickering glow of the first tradition, the Samhain Bonfire Rituals. As the Celtic New Year dawned, clans gathered in the heart of autumn's darkness, lighting towering bonfires that pierced the night. These weren't just ordinary fires, they were sacred gateways believed to blur the boundary between our world and the otherworld. Imagine the crackle of flames as spirits whispered through the smoke, drawn to the warmth of the living. To protect themselves, clans would circle the fires, wearing animal skins and chanting, a living barrier against the unseen. But the rituals took a darker turn. Archaeologists have uncovered pits near these ancient sites filled with charred bones, remnants of animal sacrifices, from horses to bulls, offered to appease the gods or perhaps to feed the spirits passing through. Some legends even speak of two-fold fires, where livestock were driven between twin flames to purify them before winter. The air would have been thick with the scent of burning herbs, the sound of drums, and the weight of 1,000 unanswered questions. What's most haunting, traces of these rituals survive. In parts of Ireland, you'll still find embers of Samhain bonfires lit on hilltops, a ghostly echo of a time when the veil between worlds was thin enough to touch. Next, we'll unravel an even quirkier tradition, one involving a tiny bird and a parade that defies explanation. Now, let's turn from the smoky mystery of Samhain to a tradition that feels almost playful until you peel back its layers. Picture this: a cold December morning and a group of Celtic youths, faces painted, marching through the village with a tiny bird, a wren, perched on a decorated pole. This was the Wren Boy Procession, a ritual so strange it makes you wonder what ancient logic drove it. The wren, often called the king of birds in Celtic lore, was hunted down on St. Stephen's Day, a twist that adds to the enigma. Why target such a small, seemingly harmless creature? Some say it symbolized the old year sacrificed to make way for the new. Others whisper of druidic rites, where the wren's death was a coded message to the spirit world. The bird was then paraded through the streets, sometimes even buried with coins, as if paying a toll to unseen forces. What's even stranger, this wasn't just one village odd habit. Variations cropped up across Celtic lands. In Wales, the wren was chased with sticks. In Scotland, it was tied with ribbons. And believe it or not, in parts of Ireland, like Dingle and Kerry, you can still catch glimpses of the Wren Boys today. They've traded real birds for fake ones, but the echoes of that eerie December ritual linger. So was it a sacrifice, a superstition, or something lost to time? Next, we'll venture into a tradition where fire and cattle collide, a spectacle that's equal parts practical and mystical. Now, let's step into the vibrant chaos of Beltane, where fire and livestock took center stage in a ritual as practical as it was mystical. Imagine the scene: twin bonfires roaring against the spring night, their flames licking the sky as clansmen drove their cattle straight between them. This wasn't just for show. Every pass through the smoke was believed to purify the herd, shielding them from disease and misfortune in the coming year. But why fire? To the Celts, flames were a bridge between worlds, and Beltane marked the start of summer, a time when the veil between the human realm and the otherworld grew thin. And with that thinning came danger, especially from fairies. Yes, you heard that right. Farmers were convinced that mischievous spirits would steal their cows' milk unless they took precautions. That's where the rowan branches came in. Tied above barn doors or woven into cattle's tails, these fairy-proof charms were thought to repel evil. 19th century folklorists recorded eerie accounts of these rituals. One witness described how villagers would leap over the bonfires themselves, emulating the cattle, while others whispered of butter churns left empty overnight blamed on fairy thieves. In the Scottish Highlands, families even sprinkled primrose flowers around their byres, convinced they were invisible to supernatural intruders. So was it magic or just early animal husbandry? Perhaps both. The Beltane cattle drives reveal a world where survival and spirituality were tangled together, where fire wasn't just warmth, it was a weapon against the unseen. Next, we'll uncover a tradition far darker, where food and death shared a chilling connection. Now, let's turn our attention to a tradition so haunting it sends shivers down the spine, the eerie practice of sin eating. Picture this: a lone figure, often an outcast, enters a room where a body lies in repose. On the chest of the deceased, a plate of bread or salt is placed. The sin eater lifts the food, consumes it, and in that moment they are believed to swallow not just the meal, but the sins of the dead, freeing the departed soul to enter the afterlife unburdened. This macabre ritual was most documented in the remote villages of Wales and the Scottish Highlands, where sin eaters were both feared and relied upon. They occupied a strange space in society, necessary for spiritual cleansing, yet shunned as pariahs. No one wanted to sit near them, share a meal with them, or even speak their name. Their role was vital, but their presence was considered tainted, a living reminder of death and moral weight. Where did this grim tradition come from? Some scholars trace it back to pre-Christian Celtic beliefs, where the boundary between life and death was porous, and rituals often involved symbolic exchanges between the living and the dead. Others see parallels in global customs, like the Tibetan sky burials, where bodies are offered to vultures to carry sins away, or the ancient Jewish scapegoat ritual, where sins were transferred to an animal and driven into the wilderness. But what makes the Celtic sin eater unique is the intimate, almost grotesque act of ingestion, the idea that sin could be physically consumed and digested. Was it a desperate bid for salvation or a lingering whisper of druidic rites? Either way, it's a stark reminder of how deeply our ancestors feared the unseen debts of the soul. Next, we'll step into a quieter but no less mysterious tradition where the living dined in silence, sharing a meal with those long gone. Now, let's shift from the somber to the romantic, but with a twist. Imagine a couple standing before their clan, hands bound together with a brightly woven cord. This wasn't a wedding as we know it today, but a Celtic handfasting, a trial marriage that lasted 1 year and 1 day. If the pair found happiness, they could choose to stay together permanently. If not, they could part ways with no shame, their hands simply unbound. This practice traces back to Brehon law, the ancient legal system of Ireland, which recognized handfasting as a legitimate union. Unlike modern marriages, it was less about lifelong vows and more about testing compatibility. The cords used weren't just decorative, they symbolized the binding of two lives, often woven from colors representing each partner's clan or personal traits. Some cords even included strands of hair from both, a physical intertwining of their futures. Hollywood loves to romanticize handfasting as a whimsical fairy tale ritual, but the reality was far more practical. It wasn't about instant love or destiny. It was a sensible arrangement, especially in rural communities where survival depended on strong partnerships. And while some films portray it as a secretive, rebellious act, handfasting was often a public event, witnessed by the entire clan. Today, modern pagans and Celtic revivalists have brought handfasting back, though with a few updates. Some still honor the trial period, while others use it as a symbolic prelude to a legal marriage. Either way, it's a fascinating glimpse into how the Celts approached love not as a fleeting emotion, but as a bond worth testing before making it permanent. Next, we'll step into a tradition where silence spoke louder than words, and the dead were invited to dinner. Now, let's step into a world where the boundary between the living and the dead grew thin, and silence held more power than words. Picture a long table set with flickering candles, plates of food, and empty chairs, places reserved not for the living but for the departed. This was the Dumb Supper, a haunting Celtic tradition where clans gathered to dine in complete silence, inviting their ancestors to join them for a meal. The rules were strict: no speaking, no laughter, not even a whisper. The silence wasn't just about respect, it was believed to create a sacred space where spirits could cross over. Food was carefully prepared, often the favorite dishes of the deceased, and placed at their empty seats. Some clans even set utensils moving on their own, a sign that the unseen guest had arrived. Stories tell of chairs scraping against the floor with no one sitting in them, or glasses tipping over as if raised by invisible hands. This ritual wasn't just about remembrance, it reflected the Celtic belief in liminal spaces, those in between moments where worlds collide. The Celts saw dusk and dawn, shorelines, and even doorways as thresholds where the living could brush against the dead. The Dumb Supper was one such moment, a deliberate blurring of lines to honor those who had passed. Interestingly, this tradition wasn't limited to solemn occasions. Some clans held dumb suppers during Samhain, when the veil between worlds was at its thinnest, while others used it to seek guidance from ancestors before major decisions. Either way, it was a powerful reminder that the dead were never truly gone, just waiting in the shadows for an invitation. Next, we'll unravel a tradition where dancing around a towering pole wasn't just for fun, it was a ritual tied to the earth's fertility, and one that would later spark outrage among the church. Now, let's turn our attention to a tradition where celebration and symbolism intertwined in a dance as old as the hills themselves. The maypole, with its towering presence and vibrant ribbons, wasn't just a centerpiece for merrymaking. It was a potent symbol of life, fertility, and the earth's awakening. Celtic clans would erect these tall poles, often made from freshly cut trees, as part of their Beltane festivities. The phallic shape was no accident. It represented the masculine energy of the sun, while the ribbons woven around it by dancing villagers symbolized the feminine forces of the earth. As clans circled the maypole, their movements weren't just for show. They believed the act of weaving the ribbons would literally awaken the soil, ensuring a bountiful harvest. Some historians argue this ritual dates back to pre-Celtic times, while others insist it was borrowed from Germanic tribes. But one thing's certain, the Celts made it their own, infusing it with their deep connection to nature's cycles. The church, however, saw things differently. By the Middle Ages, clergy condemned the maypole as pagan debauchery, citing its overt sexuality and ties to heathen gods. In some regions, authorities went so far as to ban the practice outright, fearing it would lead people astray from Christian teachings. Yet, despite these efforts, the tradition stubbornly survived, often disguised as harmless folk dancing. Interestingly, the maypole's Germanic counterparts lacked the same spiritual weight. While Germanic cultures also celebrated spring with pole dances, theirs were more about community bonding than invoking fertility. This distinction is crucial. It shows how the Celts uniquely linked their rituals to the land's vitality, a belief so strong it outlasted centuries of opposition. Next, we'll uncover a darker side of Celtic justice, where stones weren't just tools but instruments of supernatural vengeance. But now, let's step into the shadowy realm of Celtic justice, where stones held more power than swords. Across the misty hills of Ireland, you'll find bull-on stones, unassuming rocks with deep, bowl-like depressions worn into their surfaces. These weren't just natural formations, they were the Celtic clan's ancient courthouses where curses were spun like threads of fate. Picture this: a wronged villager kneels by the stone, placing their hands on a smaller turning stone nestled in the hollow. As they rotate it counterclockwise, always counterclockwise, they whisper a curse meant to strike down their enemy. Some legends say the stones groaned as they turned, as if channeling the fury of the earth itself. But here's the twist: these curses could backfire spectacularly. One tale tells of a man who cursed his neighbor's crops only for his own fields to wither overnight. Was it karma or something far older at work? The physical evidence is just as eerie. Archaeologists have found bull-on stones with grooves worn smooth by centuries of use, their indentations polished by desperate hands. Some even bear ogham markings, hints that druids might have sanctified them as sacred tools. But were they instruments of justice, allowing the powerless to strike back, or just superstition given form? Consider the cloche brica, the speckled stones of County Cork, where clans once gathered to settle feuds. Turning the stone was seen as binding oath or doom. Yet by the 19th century, locals still feared them, leaving coins or rags as offerings to appease whatever force lingered there. That's the thing about Celtic traditions. Even when their original meaning fades, the respect or fear remains. Up next, we'll wander into the groves where the Celts believed trees held more than just roots, they held the secrets of survival itself. Now, let's turn our attention to the whispering leaves of the rowan tree, a silent guardian woven into the very fabric of Celtic life. To the clans, these trees weren't just part of the landscape, they were living shields against the unseen. Planted near homes, crossroads, and even cattle pens, rowans stood as sentinels, their scarlet berries believed to glow with otherworldly power. The magic lay in the details. Families would twist rowan twigs with red thread into tiny crosses, hanging them above doorways like supernatural alarms. Medieval manuscripts call these charms witch's bane, claiming they could snap like a tripwire when evil drew near. One 12th century text describes a Scottish clan chief who blamed a failed raid on his enemy's rowan grove, convinced the trees had turned arrows aside like mist. But the rowan's reach went beyond mere superstition. Its wood was carved into protective amulets, and mothers tucked berries into children's pockets, a practice that survived into the 20th century. Folk healers brewed rowan bark tea as a cure for enchantments, while Highland farmers still nail rowan branches to barns during calving season, swearing it keeps fairy thieves from stealing milk. What's fascinating is how science tangles with the old beliefs. Rowan berries contain parasorbic acid, toxic when raw but neutralized by heat, maybe explaining why druids insisted on roasting them for rituals. Coincidence, or did the Celts grasp something we're only now rediscovering? Today, you'll find rowan charms in Edinburgh's pagan shops and hear elders mutter, "Rowan tree and red thread put the witches to their speed." It's a thread connecting us to a time when magic wasn't fantasy. It was the first line of defense. Next, we'll step into the fairy realm, where a single thorn tree could mean the difference between blessing and doom. Now, imagine walking through the Irish countryside and spotting a lone hawthorn tree, its gnarled branches standing stark against the horizon. To the Celtic clans, this wasn't just a tree, it was a doorway. A doorway to the otherworld, guarded by the owl's she, the fairy folk. Disturbing these trees wasn't just frowned upon, it was considered a death wish. The rules were simple but ironclad. Never cut down a solitary hawthorn, never disturb its roots, and never ever build too close to one. Those who ignored these taboos faced eerie consequences: failed crops, sudden illnesses, even livestock mysteriously vanishing. To appease the fairies, clans left offerings at the base of these trees, bowls of fresh milk, shiny buttons, or even bits of cloth. These weren't gifts, they were payments for protection. The belief was so strong that it shaped the land itself. In modern Ireland, roads still curve awkwardly around ancient hawthorns because bulldozing one could mean bad luck for an entire community. There's a famous case in County Kerry where a construction crew ignored warnings and cut down a fairy tree only for their machinery to break down repeatedly until they replanted a sapling and apologized to the site. But why hawthorns? These trees bloom in May, coinciding with Beltane when the veil between worlds was thinnest. Their thorns and twisted forms made them natural markers of the supernatural. Even today, you'll find ribbons tied to their branches, silent pleas for favor from the unseen. So the next time you pass a lone hawthorn, remember, some doors are better left unopened. And as we venture deeper into the mysteries of the Celts, we'll uncover how they sought wisdom not from books, but from the very alphabet of the land itself. Now let's turn our attention from the whispers of the trees to the secrets carved into them. The Celts didn't just revere nature, they used it to speak to the unseen. Enter the Ogham alphabet, a cryptic script of lines and notches etched into wood or stone. But this wasn't mere writing. To the clans, Ogham was a divine language, a tool to glimpse the future. Picture a druid in a dimly lit grove, reaching for a bundle of yew sticks, each marked with Ogham's angular symbols. Like casting dice, they'd scatter the sticks onto a cloth, reading the patterns as messages from the gods. A single line crossing another might warn of a poor harvest, while a cluster of notches could herald a coming battle. The system was shrouded in mystery, passed down orally to avoid outsiders decoding its power. Fragments of Ogham divination survive in medieval texts, hinting at rituals where the alphabet's 20 letters corresponded to trees, birch for new beginnings, oak for strength. But unlike Norse runes, which often spelled out clear words, Ogham's prophecies were layered, open to a druid's intuition. Some scholars believe the sticks were tossed onto carved stone tables, their positions revealing hidden meanings. What's striking is how Ogham contrasts with rune casting. While Norse seers chanted over runestones, Celtic diviners worked in silence, letting the land itself speak through the wood. And where runes were public, carved into weapons or monuments, Ogham was intimate, a whispered dialogue between druid and deity. Yet both shared a common thread, the belief that symbols held power over fate. And as we'll see next, the Celts took this idea to even darker extremes, with rituals that blurred the line between the sacred and the savage. But the Celts didn't just seek wisdom from symbols, they also took power from their enemies in the most visceral way possible. Now we step into one of their most chilling traditions, the headhunting cult. To the clans, a warrior's greatest trophy wasn't gold or land, it was the severed head of a foe. Roman historians like Diodorus Siculus wrote with horror about Celtic warriors hanging heads from their horses or nailing them above doorways, but this wasn't mere brutality. Heads were sacred. The Celts believed the soul resided in the skull, and by capturing it, they seized their enemy's strength. Archaeology backs this up. In southern France, shrines lined with skulls have been found, some with nails still embedded, proof they were displayed for decades. And at the Roquepatou sanctuary, stone pillars were carved with niches to hold heads, suggesting a grim form of ancestor worship. But why such obsession with heads? Some scholars argue it was spiritual, a way to harness a rival's power for protection. Others see it as psychological warfare, a warning to enemies. The truth likely lies in both. Celtic myths are full of talking heads like Bran the Blessed, whose skull guarded Britain after death. Even in defeat, a head held power. What's unsettling is how ritualized it became. Heads were sometimes preserved in cedar oil, displayed at feasts, or even consulted as oracles. The line between trophy and talisman blurred. And while Rome painted the Celts as savages, their own generals collected rebel heads, proof that terror, in the end, knows no borders. This dark tradition forces us to ask, was head hunting a barbaric custom or a sacred act? Perhaps both, because for the Celts, the dead were never truly gone. They watched, judged, and sometimes spoke. Now, let's turn from the battlefield to the throne room, where Celtic myths whisper of a fate far stranger than any warrior's end. Among the clans, kings didn't just die, they perished in threes. This eerie pattern, known as the threefold death, wove itself into legends like a cursed prophecy. Take Lugh Lord Gifts from Welsh lore. Stabbed by a spear, he transformed into an eagle, only to be shot mid-flight, a death-spanning wounding, falling and drowning in a river. But this wasn't just storytelling. The threefold death echoed across Celtic lands, from Ireland's Diarmuid to Scotland's Lailochen. Each met ends that twisted together violence, water, and fire. Why this obsession with trios? Some scholars see echoes of ancient ritual killings where sacrifices mirrored the elements, earth, sky, and water. Others point to the Celts' sacred number 3, symbolizing balance. Think triple goddesses or the 3 realms of land, sea, and sky. Even Christian scribes preserved these tales, though they scrubbed them of pagan roots. Archaeology adds chilling weight. Bog bodies like Lindoman, strangled, bludgeoned, and throat cut, suggest real-life parallels. Was this a druidic judgment for kings who broke sacred laws, or a poetic warning about power's fragility? The threefold death forces us to ask, were these myths morality plays, historical records, or both? Because in Celtic tradition, even a king's demise wasn't just an end, it was a message carved in 3 acts. But the mysteries of Celtic tradition don't stop at the threefold death. Let's venture into the shadowy forests of medieval Ireland, where whispers of shape-shifters and moonlit transformations haunted the clans. Among the most chilling tales are the Werewolf Trials of Ossory, where people believed certain families could shed their human skin and take the form of wolves. One of the most infamous cases comes from 14th century Kilkenny, where a man stood before authorities, insisting his wife was a werewolf. He claimed she ran with a pack under the full moon, returning at dawn with wild eyes and blood on her hands. The court records, though fragmented, reveal a society deeply unsettled by these accusations. Was this mass hysteria or something darker lurking in Celtic folklore? Some historians draw eerie parallels to Norse berserkers, warriors said to channel animal fury in battle. Others see traces of lycanthropy, the medieval belief in humans cursed to become beasts. But the Celts had their own twist. Unlike European werewolf myths tied to curses or bites, Ossory's tales spoke of voluntary transformations, tied to ancient clan rituals or even druidic rites lost to time. What's striking is how these stories persisted. As late as the 1600s, travelers reported meeting Irish families who swore their ancestors could wolf walk. Whether these were metaphors for outlaw bands, psychological phenomena, or remnants of pre-Christian animal cults, one thing's clear: the Celts didn't just fear the wild. In some clans, they believed they could become it. This blurring of human and beast forces us to ask, were these stories warnings, allegories, or glimpses of a forgotten tradition where the line between man and monster was terrifyingly thin? Now, let's turn our gaze from the howling forests of Ossory to the quiet thaw of early spring, when the Celts watched the earth for a different kind of omen: the stirring of serpents. Imbolc, the festival marking winter's end, wasn't just about lighting candles or honoring Brigid, the goddess of hearth and healing. For many clans, it was a time to gather at sacred wells or hilltops, their eyes fixed on the ground, waiting for the first snake to slither from its winter den. This wasn't mere superstition. The Celts believed these serpents were messengers, their movements predicting the weather ahead. A quick emergence meant an early spring, a delayed one warned of lingering frost. But the snakes carried deeper symbolism too. Brigid, often depicted with a serpent coiled around her arm, was tied to rebirth and healing, the snake's shedding skin mirroring the earth's renewal. Then came St. Patrick, or at least the legends that grew around him. The famous tale of him banishing snakes from Ireland might not be about reptiles at all. Scholars suggest it was a metaphor for stamping out pagan rites, especially those linked to Imbolc. The serpent, once a sacred symbol, became a villain in Christian retellings. Yet in remote villages, old habits lingered. Even in the 1800s, farmers in the Scottish Highlands would leave out milk for snakes on Brigid's feast day, a whispered nod to traditions far older than saints. So were the Imbolc serpents mere weather vanes or something more. Their dual role as both practical almanacs and spiritual symbols hints at how the Celts saw nature not just as a force to observe, but as a language to decipher. And in that language, even the smallest creature could carry the weight of prophecy. But let's leave the whispering serpents behind and step into the misty twilight, where something far more unsettling prowls, the phantom black dogs of Celtic lore. These weren't just any hounds, towering as tall as a man's waist, with eyes like burning coals and coats darker than midnight. They were omens of death, appearing to foretell tragedy or escort souls to the otherworld. Take the Coo Sith of the Scottish Highlands, a spectral green-eyed beast said to haunt lonely glens. Clans believed hearing its 3 mournful barks meant death was near, unless you could hide before the third one sounded. Then there's Cornwall's Black Shuck, a demonic dog whose appearance in 1577 at a church in Bungay left scorch marks on the door and 2 parishioners dead mid-prayer. Even today, locals swear the burns are still visible. But why dogs? To the Celts, dogs were guardians of thresholds between life and death, the seen and unseen. Their loyalty made them ideal psychopomps, guiding spirits safely to the afterlife. Yet not all encounters were dire. Some clans told of benevolent black dogs leading lost travelers home or guarding children near treacherous bogs. Modern cryptid hunters draw eerie parallels to legends like the Mothman or Yorkshire's Barghest, but the Celts might have seen these hounds differently. For them, the line between warning and protection was thin. A phantom dog's appearance wasn't just about fear, it was a reminder that the otherworld was always closer than it seemed. And sometimes, in the hush of twilight, you might still hear the pad of unseen paws behind you. Now, let's turn our attention to a far darker corner of Celtic tradition, one where the line between reverence and horror blurs. Deep in the heart of ancient druidic groves, clans carried out ritual killings, acts shrouded in both spiritual significance and grim mystery. These weren't random acts of violence but carefully orchestrated ceremonies, possibly to appease gods like Tutates, the Celtic deity of war and tribal protection. Roman accounts, ever eager to paint the Celts as barbaric, described these groves as places of unspeakable cruelty, but archaeology tells a more nuanced story. Take the famous Lindo Man, a bog body discovered in England in the 1980s. His preserved remains revealed a stomach full of mistletoe pollen, a plant sacred to druids, and evidence of a threefold death: strangulation, a blow to the head, and a slit throat. This mirrors the Celtic motif of triple death seen in myths, suggesting these killings weren't mere brutality but ritual acts with deep symbolic meaning. Were these sacrifices pleas for fertility, victory in battle, or cosmic balance? The truth may lie somewhere between Roman exaggeration and Celtic spirituality. Bog bodies like Lindo Man show signs of careful preparation, well-groomed nails, last meals of special foods, hinting that some victims may have been willing participants, even honored in their final moments. Yet the groves themselves remain elusive. Unlike Roman temples, druidic sacred spaces left no stone foundations, just whispers in the soil and the occasional cache of bones. What's clear is that for the Celts, life and death were intertwined in ways that still unsettle us today. And as we peel back the layers of time, these sacred groves challenge us to see beyond the horror into a world where even death held a sacred purpose. Now, shifting from the shadowy rituals of sacred groves, let's step onto the battlefield, or at least the battlefield as the Romans described it. Picture this: Celtic warriors charging into combat, their bodies painted head to toe in swirling blue patterns, their appearance as terrifying as their battle cries. This is the enduring image of the woad-painted warrior, a symbol of Celtic ferocity burned into history by Roman writers like Julius Caesar. But how much of this is fact and how much is Roman propaganda? The truth is, we have no direct evidence that Celts used woad, a plant-based dye, for war paint. Caesar's accounts written to justify his conquests are riddled with exaggerations. He claimed the Celts fought naked, their blue-stained skin meant to shock enemies, yet archaeological finds tell a different story. While woad was indeed used for dyeing fabrics, no ancient Celtic art or remains show warriors adorned in battle paint. So why the disconnect? Here's where things get intriguing. Experimental archaeology suggests woad might have had another, more mystical purpose. When applied to the skin, fresh woad leaves can induce mild hallucinations and numbness effects that could have been useful in ceremonial trances or pre-battle rituals. Some scholars argue the blue warriors were less about combat and more about invoking spiritual protection, perhaps to channel the power of gods like Cernunnos, the horned deity of the wild. And let's not forget the psychological angle. Even if woad wasn't common in battle, the myth itself served a purpose. The Romans, masters of spin, may have amplified the image of savage blue demons to dehumanize the Celts and rally support back home. Meanwhile, Celtic tribes might have embraced the legend, using their fearsome reputation as a weapon of its own. So were the Celts really these blue-painted berserkers of legend? Probably not, but the persistence of the myth reveals something deeper: how history is shaped by the fears and fantasies of those who write it. And that's a battle no archaeology can fully settle. Now, moving from the battlefield myths to the hearthside fears of Celtic clans, we encounter one of the most heartbreaking and unsettling traditions, the changeling panic. Imagine a mother cradling her frail, crying infant, convinced the child isn't hers at all, but a fairy imposter left in its place. This wasn't just folklore, it was a widespread belief that led to real, often brutal consequences. The logic was chillingly simple. If a baby fell sick, failed to thrive, or showed unusual behavior, clans suspected the fairies had stolen the real child and left a changeling, a withered, restless fairy substitute. To expose the imposter, families resorted to horrific tests. Some placed the infant on a hot shovel, believing a true changeling would levitate to escape the heat. Others left the child overnight at a fairy ring, hoping the real baby would be returned by dawn. But why such extreme measures? Dig deeper, and you'll find layers of fear and helplessness. In an era with no medical explanations for infant illnesses or disabilities, fairies became a scapegoat for tragedy. Psychological studies suggest these panics were a coping mechanism, a way to rationalize the unbearable grief of losing a child. The darkest evidence comes from 19th century court records. In Ireland and Scotland, multiple cases document parents or neighbors accused of killing changeling infants. One 1826 trial in County Kerry involved a woman who drowned her child in a stream, convinced it was a fairy. The court's struggle to reconcile folk belief with justice reveals how deeply these fears were woven into clan life. Yet there's a twist. Some scholars argue changeling stories also served as covert warnings. Tales often described fairies targeting healthy, beautiful babies, subtly urging parents to guard their children closely. Whether as superstition, social control, or shattered hearts seeking answers, the changeling myth remains a haunting window into the Celtic mind, where love and terror walked hand in hand. Now, shifting from the chilling tales of changelings to a tradition steeped in wisdom and mystery, let's dive into the Celtic reverence for the salmon of knowledge. This wasn't just a meal, it was a sacred ritual, a gateway to divine insight. Picture this: a shimmering salmon swimming in the pool of wisdom, its flesh imbued with all the world's knowledge. To eat it was to inherit its power, and no story captures this better than the legend of Fionn mac Cumhaill. As the tale goes, young Fionn was apprenticed to the poet Finnegas, who had spent years trying to catch this mythical fish. When Finnegas finally succeeded, he tasked Fionn with cooking it, but warned him not to eat a single bite. Yet when hot juice splashed onto Fionn's thumb, he instinctively sucked it to soothe the burn. In that moment, he absorbed the salmon's wisdom, surpassing his master and becoming one of the greatest heroes of Celtic lore. But why a salmon? Scholars point to druidic beliefs that saw fish as liminal creatures moving between worlds, water and land, making them perfect vessels for hidden knowledge. Some clans even avoided eating fish altogether, treating them as taboo except in sacred rituals. This mirrors other Indo-European myths, like the Norse god Odin stealing the mead of poetry or the Hindu Soma, a divine elixir of wisdom. The deeper question is whether these feasts were literal or symbolic. Were druids actually serving salmon in ceremonies, or was this a metaphor for esoteric teachings passed down orally? Iron Age sites near rivers have yielded fish bones in ritual contexts, hinting at real practices. Yet the enduring power of Fionn's story suggests something more, a belief that wisdom wasn't just learned but consumed, a tangible force flowing through the very flesh of the world. From forbidden fruit to ambrosia, cultures worldwide share this idea of transformative food. But the Celtic twist, their salmon wasn't just a gift, it was a test. Fionn's accidental taste underscores a truth the clans knew well. True wisdom often comes unbidden, in flashes of instinct or chance, and that's a feast worth savoring. Now, let's peel back the layers of a tradition that might surprise you. Those eerie Halloween lanterns we all know today didn't start with pumpkins. Long before jack-o'-lanterns lit up porches in America, Celtic clans were carving far creepier faces into turnips. These weren't just decorations, they were spiritual armor. Picture a dark Samhain night, the veil between worlds thin as mist. Clans hollowed out turnips, gouging jagged eyes and snarling mouths, then placed a smoldering coal inside. These flickering faces weren't meant to welcome trick-or-treaters. They were wards against restless spirits. Folk tales tell of lanterns placed on gateposts or carried through fields, their ghastly glow tricking malevolent entities into thinking they'd met a fiercer creature. But sometimes the lanterns seemed to have minds of their own. Accounts from the Scottish Highlands describe turnips rolling uphill against the wind or their carved expressions twisting in the firelight. One Irish legend tells of a lantern that followed a man home, only to vanish at dawn, leaving behind a pile of ash and a single blackened coin. When Irish and Scottish immigrants reached America, they brought this tradition with them. But pumpkins, abundant and easier to carve, soon replaced turnips. Yet the old fears lingered. Early American settlers whispered that pumpkin lanterns left out too long might attract more than just spirits. Some claimed to see them swaying on their own, as if tugged by invisible hands. What's fascinating is how a practical folk practice morphed into a global symbol. Those grinning pumpkins, they're distant cousins of the Celts' turnip sentinels, a reminder that even our spookiest traditions have roots in something deeper, a primal urge to light a flame against the dark. Now let's journey to the misty glens of Scotland, where standing stones hold more than just history, they hold grudges. Among the most unsettling relics of Celtic tradition are the Bullaun stones, often called cursing pillars. These aren't your ordinary rocks. Carved with shallow depressions, they were believed to be vessels for vengeance. Imagine a clan elder kneeling by one of these stones, pouring water into its hollow while whispering a curse against a rival. The ritual was simple but potent. As the water pooled, so did the malice. Some say the stones absorbed the anger, turning it into a supernatural weapon. Archaeologists have found Bullaun stones near ancient battlefields and boundary lines, suggesting they were used to curse trespassers or enemies. But the most famous of these sites is the Clootie Well, where the tradition takes an eerie twist. Even today, visitors tie strips of cloth called clooties to nearby trees after dipping them in the well's water. Some plead for healing, others for luck, but a few still mutter curses under their breath. The rags, rotting slowly in the damp air, are said to carry the weight of those wishes. Is this practice pagan or Christian? That's where things get tangled. The well is dedicated to St. Boniface, yet the rituals feel older, like a druidic custom dressed in saints' clothing. Scholars argue whether the clooties are offerings to the old gods or prayers to the new, but one thing's clear: the line between blessing and curse here is as thin as the Highland mist. What's chilling is how these stones blur morality. A curse could be justice for a stolen cow or petty revenge for a slight. And while most modern visitors leave hopeful wishes, you'll still find the occasional ribbon tied in a tight, angry knot, proof that some traditions, like grudges, never truly fade. Now let's step into the soft light of a Beltane dawn, where the grass glistens with more than just morning dew. It holds the promise of eternal youth. Among the most enchanting yet mysterious traditions of the Celtic clans was the ritual of rolling in the May dew, a practice steeped in magic and beauty. Women, and sometimes men, would rise before sunrise on the 1st of May, venturing into meadows to bathe their faces or even roll naked in the dew-laden grass. This wasn't just a whimsical spa day, it was a sacred act. The Celts believed the dew collected at dawn on Beltane was infused with the sun's vitality, a kind of liquid sunlight that could restore youth, heal ailments, and even grant radiant beauty. Folk records from as late as the 1800s describe elderly women revisiting this ritual, convinced it smoothed their wrinkles and restored a youthful glow. But where did this belief come from? Look deeper, and you'll find threads of fairy lore woven into the practice. In Celtic mythology, dew was thought to be a gift from the Owls She, the fairy folk, who blessed the earth with it under the cover of night. Some tales warn that skipping the ritual might invite fairy mischief like stolen beauty or bad luck in love. The symbolism runs even richer. Dew, caught between night and day, was seen as a liminal substance, a bridge between worlds. Its fleeting nature mirrored the Celtic view of life's cyclical renewal, tying it to Beltane's themes of fertility and rebirth. Even the act of rolling in it echoed older pagan rites, where touching the earth was a way to harness its energy. By the 19th century, the ritual had faded into folk custom, with young girls dabbing dew on their cheeks for luck rather than diving into fields. Yet, in remote villages, whispers persisted of women who kept the old ways alive, their faces strangely unlined by time. Was it magic, placebo, or something science hasn't uncovered? Either way, the Maydew ritual remains one of the most poetic and puzzling traditions of the Celtic world. Next, we'll uncover how clans used dreams of white bulls to crown their kings, a practice as strange as it was sacred. Now, let's shift from the dew-kissed meadows of Beltane to the shadowed roads of the Celtic night, where an eerie silence often meant something far more sinister was near. Among the most chilling traditions was the belief in ghostly funeral processions, spectral parades said to herald death itself. At the heart of this fear was the Coist Bodhar, a phantom death coach rumored to glide silently through the darkness, collecting souls. The name itself sends shivers. Coist Bodhar translates to deaf or mute carriage, a vehicle without the clatter of hooves or the creak of wheels. Witnesses claimed it was drawn by headless horses, led by a shadowy driver, and if you heard its approach, it was already too late. Your name was next on its list, but this wasn't just an Irish nightmare. Across the Celtic world, variations of the death coach haunted clan lore. In Wales, the Toily, a ghostly funeral procession, was said to mirror real funerals yet to come. If you saw one passing, you might catch a glimpse of your own face among the mourners, a grim omen of your impending fate. In Scotland, the Keenig, a banshee-like spirit, wailed ahead of these processions, her cries echoing through glens to warn or terrify those marked for death. Clans took these omens deadly seriously. Many avoided traveling certain roads at night, especially near old burial grounds or ferry forts where the veil between worlds was thin. Some carried iron or rowan wood as protection, while others whispered prayers to Brigid or the saints to ward off the coach's notice. Even into the 19th century, families barred their doors after sundown, fearing the Coist Bodhar might pause at their gate. What's fascinating is how these tales blurred the line between superstition and social control. Were ghostly processions just stories to keep people indoors after dark, or did they stem from older druidic beliefs about the afterlife? Some scholars suggest they're remnants of pagan death rites, where the dead were escorted to the otherworld by unseen forces. Others point to real-life tragedies like mass deaths from famine or plague that left communities haunted by collective grief. One thing's certain, the fear was real. Even today, in remote parts of Ireland and Wales, some still refuse to walk certain roads at night, ears straining for the sound of hooves that never make a sound. Next, we'll delve into a tradition where the line between sacrifice and sovereignty blurred: the sacred drowning of white horses, a ritual tied to the goddess Epona and the fate of kings. Moving from the spectral roads haunted by ghostly processions, we now step into the realm of sacred waters, where the Celts performed one of their most solemn and mysterious rituals, the drowning of white horses. This was no random act of cruelty, but a deeply symbolic sacrifice tied to sovereignty, the divine, and the very fate of kings. At the heart of this tradition stood the goddess Epona, a protector of horses and a guide between worlds. To honor her, clans selected flawless white horses, animals seen as pure and otherworldly, and led them into lakes or rivers to drown. The act wasn't just about offering life to the gods, it was a cosmic transaction. Water, in Celtic belief, was a gateway to the otherworld, and by submerging these sacred creatures, clans believed they could secure blessings, fertility, or even prophecies about their leaders. Evidence of these rituals lingers in both legend and archaeology. The ancient Irish epic Táin Bo Cúailnge hints at the sacred status of horses, linking them to royal power. Meanwhile, in rivers like the Boyne and the Thames, archaeologists have uncovered horse skulls and bones, often placed alongside weapons or ceremonial objects. These finds suggest the drownings were part of grand public rites, possibly during coronations or times of crisis. But what makes this tradition even more intriguing is how it contrasts with Viking ship burials, where horses were slain to accompany warriors to Valhalla. While the Norse saw horses as steeds for the afterlife, the Celts viewed them as messengers to the gods, a distinction that reveals their unique spiritual worldview. Some scholars argue the drownings were also tied to the Tab phase, a bull sacrifice used to test a king's legitimacy, suggesting a broader pattern of animal rituals linked to power. Was this practice as brutal as it sounds? Perhaps, but to the Celts it was a necessary dialogue with the divine, a way to ensure harmony between the human and supernatural realms. Even today, the echo of these sacrifices lingers in folklore, where white horses sometimes appear as omens or as ghosts rising from the water, still bound to their ancient duty. Next, we'll uncover how the Celts sought glimpses of the future not in stars, but in something far more fragile: the cracks of an egg, a practice as delicate as it was mysterious. Now let's crack open one of the Celts' most enigmatic practices: divination by egg. Far from a simple breakfast staple, eggs held a sacred place in Celtic spirituality, serving as fragile windows into the future. The Druids, those revered keepers of wisdom, believed the cracks and patterns in an egg's shell could reveal everything from harvest fortunes to the fate of kings. Roman historians like Pliny the Elder wrote of Druids tossing eggs into sacred fires or studying their fractures under moonlight, but the full ritual remains shrouded in mystery. Reconstructed from fragments of Old Irish and Welsh poetry, we know the process likely involved chanting incantations as the egg was boiled or broken. The Druids would then interpret the shapes of the cracks. A jagged line might warn of conflict, while a spiral could signal prosperity. Some verses even suggest they used colored eggs, with hues like red or black carrying specific omens. What makes this tradition so fascinating is its blend of simplicity and depth. Unlike the grand horse sacrifices or bonfire ceremonies, egg divination was intimate, accessible to both Druids and everyday clansfolk. Yet it demanded sharp intuition, a skill honed through years of study. Modern experiments with reconstructed methods show how subtle variations in heat or handling can create wildly different patterns, hinting at the precision required to read an egg correctly. Interestingly, this practice wasn't unique to the Celts. Similar traditions appear in Slavic and Mediterranean cultures, but the Druidic version stands out for its ties to nature's cycles. Eggs symbolized rebirth, and their use in prophecy may have peaked during spring festivals like Beltane, when the veil between worlds was thin. Could a cracked egg really predict the future? To the Celts, it wasn't about magic alone. It was about listening to the whispers of the natural world, one fragile shell at a time. Next, we'll confront a sound that chilled the bravest of warriors, the Banshee's cry, an omen woven into the very identity of Celtic clans. But now, let's turn our ears to a sound that could freeze the blood of even the fiercest Celtic warriors, the Banshee's keening. Unlike the quiet crack of an egg, this was a piercing wail that carried across the hills, a ghostly herald of death. Each Celtic clan had its own version of this supernatural woman, her mournful cry echoing through the night as a warning that someone was about to pass into the other world. Take the MacLeods of Scotland, for example. Their banshee, known as the Bean Nye, was said to appear by streams, washing the blood-stained clothes of those destined to die. Legends describe her as a small, green-clad woman with webbed feet, a far cry from the Hollywood image of a floating spectre. What's chilling is how specific these omens were. Some clans reported hearing the banshee's cry days before a death, while others claimed she'd appear at the family's ancestral home, combing her long hair with a silver comb. But where did this tradition begin? Many scholars trace it back to ancient funeral customs. In pre-Christian times, Celtic women known as keeners would lead public laments for the dead, their improvised songs guiding the soul to the afterlife. Over centuries, these real-life mourners may have morphed into the supernatural banshee, a figure forever tied to the liminal space between life and death. What's striking is how deeply personal these encounters were. The banshee wasn't some random ghost, she was a familial spirit, often linked to specific bloodlines. The O'Briens of Ireland, for instance, believed their banshee had followed them since the Battle of Clontarf in the year 1014. Even today, some families in the Scottish Highlands swear they've heard the telltale wail before a relative's passing, a tradition that refuses to fade into silence. Next, we'll step onto the athletic fields of the ancient Celts, where funeral games and marriage markets blurred the lines between celebration and sacred rite. Now, let's leave the eerie wails of the banshee behind and step into the vibrant, sunlit world of the Lugnasad Tailteen Games. Picture this: a sprawling festival where the air buzzes with chariot races, feats of strength, and even matchmaking ceremonies, all held in honor of the dead. These games weren't just about competition, they were a sacred blend of celebration and mourning, tied to the Celtic god Lugh and his foster mother, Tailtew. According to legend, Tailtew, a goddess of the earth, cleared the plains of Ireland for agriculture and died of exhaustion. In her memory, Lugh established the Tailteen Games, a spectacle that combined athletic prowess with communal bonding. Charioteers raced at breakneck speeds, warriors showcased their skills in spear throwing, and young couples met at the infamous marriage markets, where temporary unions could be formed with a simple handshake. These matches often became permanent, weaving new alliances between clans, but the games were more than just entertainment. They were a way to honor the dead while ensuring the living thrived, a balance between grief and renewal. The races and contests mirrored the cycles of harvest and hardship, a theme central to Lugnasad, the festival marking the start of the harvest season. Even the location held significance. The games were held in County Meath, where Tailtew was said to be buried, turning the land into a sacred gathering place. What's fascinating is how these ancient traditions evolved. Over time, the Tailteen Games faded, but their spirit lived on. Modern Irish festivals, like the revived Tailteen Games of the early 20th century or local harvest fairs, still echo the same mix of competition and community. You can even see traces of it in today's Highland Games, where caber tossing and hammer throws carry whispers of Celtic heritage. Next, we'll uncover a bizarre belief that had Celtic clans pointing fingers at their neighbors, accusing them of stealing butter through witchcraft. Yes, you heard that right. Now, let's shift from the roaring crowds of the Telltale games to something far stranger, a superstition so peculiar it might leave you scratching your head. Imagine waking up one morning to find your butter churn empty, not because of a thief, but because a witch had supposedly flown off with its essence. This was no mere folktale to the Celtic clans, it was a genuine fear that shaped daily life. The belief in butter witches was widespread across Scotland and Ireland, where dairy was a lifeline for survival. Clans were convinced that certain women, often outsiders or those with grudges, could magically steal the richness from milk or butter, leaving behind a useless, watery mess. The methods were as creative as they were bizarre. Some thought witches transformed into hares to sneak into barns at night, while others claimed they chanted spells from a distance, summoning the butter's essence through the air like invisible thieves. But the clans weren't defenseless. They fought back with counter-charms straight out of a fantasy novel. Iron nails were hammered into churns to repel dark magic, as iron was believed to disrupt witchcraft. Some poured salt into milk pails, while others carved protective symbols into dairy tools. The most chilling evidence of this panic comes from trial records in the Scottish Highlands, like the 1582 case of a woman accused of butter theft. Witnesses swore they'd seen her spirit flitting around their farms at night, a claim that in those times could mean a death sentence. What's truly fascinating is how this superstition reveals the Celtic worldview. Butter wasn't just food, it symbolized wealth, health, and even cosmic balance. To lose it to witchcraft wasn't just an inconvenience, it was an attack on the natural order. And while we might chuckle at the idea today, these fears had real consequences, fueling witch hunts that tore communities apart. Next, we'll delve into an even more mystical tradition, one where dreams of white bulls decided the fate of kings. Now, let's step into the shadowy world of Celtic kingship, where the line between dream and destiny blurred in the most extraordinary way. Picture this, a druid deep in ritual slumber, his mind wandering through visions of a towering white bull. This wasn't just a dream, it was a divine message, a sign that would crown the next king. Welcome to the enigmatic Tab phase, or bull feast, a ceremony as mysterious as it was pivotal to Celtic rule. At the heart of this ritual was the sacred white bull, a creature revered across Celtic lands as a symbol of strength, fertility, and royal authority. The druids would slaughter the bull, then prepare a feast from its flesh. A chosen seer would consume the meat and enter a trance-like sleep, guided by chants and incense. In this state, they'd dream of the future king, sometimes seeing his face, other times receiving cryptic signs like a bull's roar or a flash of light. The clans believed these visions were direct messages from the gods, leaving no room for doubt. But here's where historians clash. Was this ritual purely symbolic, or did it involve literal bull sacrifices? Some argue the white bull was a metaphor, a spiritual stand-in for the king's divine right. Others point to archaeological finds, bull skulls buried near royal sites, bones with ceremonial markings, as proof of actual sacrifices. The ancient Irish text Tainbo Cuelge adds fuel to the fire, describing bulls with almost supernatural powers, suggesting their physical presence was essential to the ritual's magic. What's undeniable is the weight of these dreams. A king chosen by the Tab phase wasn't just a ruler, he was a vessel for the god's will, and if his reign faltered. The clans might wonder, had the druids misread the bull's omen? This blend of spirituality and politics reveals how deeply the Celts tied their fate to the unseen world. Next, we'll wander into the frostbitten nights of midwinter, where clans believed they could shed their human skins quite literally, to become something else entirely. As the winter solstice cloaked the Celtic lands in its longest nights, something extraordinary stirred among the clans, not just celebrations but transformations. Imagine a time when the boundary between human and beast grew thin, when families didn't just light fires against the cold but became creatures to guard their homes. This was the world of the Yule shapeshifters, where midwinter wasn't just a season, it was a time of magic and metamorphosis. In the remote corners of Scotland and Ireland, elders whispered of clans who could shed their human forms like old cloaks, taking on the shapes of wolves, stags, or even birds. These transformations weren't just stories, they were rituals of protection. As the darkness pressed in, families believed that assuming an animal's guise would ward off evil spirits and hungry ghosts lurking in the winter gloom. Some tales describe entire villages wearing animal skins, their chants and dances blurring the line between ceremony and survival. But how does this connect to the wren hunt we explored earlier? The link lies in the disguise. Just as youths hunted the wren as a symbolic act of conquering winter's darkness, the Yule shapeshifters used animal forms to embody strength and vigilance. Both traditions shared a deeper theme, the human need to confront the unknown by becoming part of it. Even today, echoes of this survive in the Hebrides, where guising, dressing in costumes to ward off mischief harks back to those ancient metamorphoses. What's most fascinating is the duality of these beliefs. While some clans saw shape-shifting as a sacred duty, others feared it, spinning tales of cursed kin who couldn't change back. These stories reveal the Celts' complex relationship with the natural world, a mix of reverence and wariness. Were these rituals mere symbolism, or did some truly believe in physical transformation? The answer might lie in the liminal space between myth and memory, where the shortest days of the year made anything seem possible. Now, let's turn to a tradition where gold glittered with deception, where the Celts learned that not all that glowed was a gift. But not all treasures in the Celtic world were what they seemed. Picture this: a clansman stumbles upon a trove of glittering gold coins in the moonlight, only to wake with handfuls of crumpled leaves at sunrise. This was the cruel trick of the fairy gold, a deception woven into countless clan stories across Ireland and Scotland. These tales weren't just whimsy, they carried sharp warnings about the dangers of greed and the otherworld's slippery bargains. The pattern was eerily consistent. A traveler would encounter the owls, the fairy folk, offering gold or jewels in exchange for favors, or sometimes left as traps for the unwary. But by dawn, the wealth would vanish, leaving behind worthless husks, gnarled twigs, dried leaves, or even lumps of peat. Some legends claim the victims were left physically aged, as if decades had passed in a single night of fairy delusion. What's striking is how these stories mirror real Iron Age practices. Archaeologists have found ring money, crude bronze coils that may have symbolized wealth in trade. Could the fairy gold myths be distorted memories of these early currencies losing value? Yet there's a deeper layer here. These stories often targeted specific vices: the farmer who neglected his duties to chase fairy riches, or the chief who hoarded phantom gold while his clan starved. In a culture where communal sharing was sacred, the fairy gold served as a morality tale. Wealth without honor was as fleeting as morning dew. Even the act of accepting fairy gifts was taboo, as it bound humans to the otherworld's unpredictable rules. Modern folklorists debate whether these tales were purely symbolic or rooted in hallucinogenic fungi or peat bog gases that induced visions, but their legacy endures. As late as the 19th century, Irish families warned children against picking up too shiny coins near fairy forts. And perhaps that's the real magic of these stories, not in the gold's disappearance, but in how they crystallized a timeless truth. In the Celtic world, the greatest treasures were never the ones that glittered, but those that couldn't be stolen by dawn. Now, let's step into the shadowed groves where the druids whispered secrets to the mistletoe, a plant so sacred. Its rituals were guarded with lethal seriousness.